And many Christians' lives are full of instability. Many Christians' lives are full of confusion. Many Christians' lives lack peace and are even filled with evil because they are trying to live their life by their own wisdom and not the wisdom of God. What is the reason someone might do good works without the meekness or the humility of wisdom? Verse 14 says this. Verses 14 to 16, it says, "But if you have bitter jealousy and selfish ambition in your hearts, do not boast and be false to the truth. This is not the wisdom that comes down from above, but is earthly, unspiritual, and demonic. For where jealousy and selfish ambition exist, there will be disorder and every vile practice." Listen, bitter jealousy and selfish ambition are the opposite of the meekness of wisdom mentioned in verse 13. You might say, or you might suggest, that this is the evidence of false wisdom. I actually, if you were to look at this verse 14, I prefer the King James translation here because it says bitter envying or strife, and strife in your hearts. And these words are a better translation or a better understanding than what I read this morning. Because these words actually refer to someone who has a critical or a contentious spirit who stirs up fights because they are motivated by their own self-interest. It's interesting, actually, if you get into this word, it's studied in the Greek. This word originally in the Greek, the word for selfish ambition or strife was also used for canvassing or scheming for public office. Politics, yes. It's an interesting one, the picture that it lays out in your mind when you see that. Some things to consider when we're thinking about this. Are our efforts and enthusiasm for the Lord genuine, or are they driven by fleshly or self-motivated desires? Here's something to think about, to consider if we're saying, do I have bitter jealousy or selfish ambition, or do I have bitter envying and strife? Do I celebrate when others succeed, or do I get jealous and critical? Or what about this? When others fail, do I feel burdened, or am I glad? Those are ways to discover or think about if we have that sort of jealousy or selfish ambition in our hearts, whether we're walking in the wisdom of God or we're walking in this other type of wisdom. If you have bitter jealousy and selfish ambition in your hearts, James says, do not boast. Or in other words, do not be proud of yourselves because you're in the false truth. If you have bitter jealousy and selfish ambition in your hearts, don't brag or deceive yourself into thinking you are in the truth or being wise. In fact, he's saying this is not the wisdom of God, but it's earthly, sensual, and demonic. Think he's speaking to Christians on this factor. Okay, he's not speaking to the world. He's speaking to the church. That's a strong statement to the church. He's saying if these things are in your heart, you are earthly, sensual, and these things are coming from a demonic influence. Earthly meaning they're only viewing life from this temporal viewpoint of what's happening here on earth. There's no eternal lens. There's no eternal focus on what they're thinking. Sensual meaning natural or fleshly. They're only governed by their fleshly desires. They're only there to gratify the flesh. They're only there to satisfy their own senses. Demonic is basically saying these things are inspired by demons. In other words, as he says, the wisdom from God is from above. The wisdom of demons are from below. And he says, if you have this bitter jealousy and selfish ambition in your hearts, this is not the wisdom that comes from above, but is earthly, unspiritual, or it's sensual, and it's demonic. And here's the result. For where jealousy and selfish ambition exist, there will be disorder, or there will be confusion and every vile practice. This is the fruit of human and earthly wisdom. Worldly wisdom produces trouble. Worldly thinking produces worldly living, which is wrong living, which produces problems. When he's saying there disorder or confusion, he's talking about it produces instability. It's a tumultuous thing. It brings this tumultuous outcome as opposed to peace, as opposed to quietness, opposed to tranquility. This is what worldly wisdom produces. This is what bitter envying and jealousy and strife produces. And by the way, this disorder and this confusion, this instability, this opposing to peace, this lack of tranquility sets the stage for every evil work. We wonder why the world is in the state that it is in. Here's the answer. We live in a world where there is no fear of God, where people are practicing or operating by their own wisdom, where governments are operating by their own wisdom, where much of it is because of jealousy, strife, and selfish ambition. And because of it, we have confusion and disorder, and we have instability. And that has set the stage for every vile, every evil, every foul work imaginable in our world today. But as again I'm saying, James is talking to who? The church. He's talking to Christians. And many Christians' lives are full of instability. Many Christians' lives are full of confusion. Many Christians' lives lack peace and are even filled with evil because they are trying to live their life by their own wisdom and not the wisdom of God.